The Union Cabinet on Wednesday approved the draft Data Protection Bill, paving the way for its introduction in the upcoming monsoon session of Parliament. If passed, this will become India's first such law and be part of the core data governance framework 6 years after the Supreme Court declared privacy as a fundamental right for every single Indian. Good afternoon. Welcome to Easynomics on Business Today Television. I'm Siddharth Zarabi and I'm joined by two experts on this subject. Rama Vedashree, the former Chief Executive Officer of the Data Security Council of India. We are also joined by Kanishk Gaur, founder and CEO of the India Future Foundation. Thank you very much. Lots to unpack in the time that we have on today's episode of Easynomics. But Rama, I'm coming to you first with the request to explain to our viewers what is this law all about and really why now?
Sure. Thanks, Siddharth. Thanks for having me along with Kanishk. The first thing is, you already mentioned that almost 6 years, August 2017, the Justice Puttaswamy judgment where information privacy was, declared as a fundamental right for citizens of India. And I had the opportunity to be part of the Justice Sri Krishna committee, which was tasked to draft a comprehensive privacy bill and also a very exhaustive report that we had submitted. The fundamental context for all of this over the last 5 to 6 years has been what is the legislative framework and the institutional mechanism to make sure we enforce privacy. And as more and more activities are getting digitized, businesses are getting digitized, and users across age groups, across societies and rural and urban communities are consuming a lot of digital services, whether it is digital payments, commerce, entertainment, education, healthcare, digital healthcare, right? So, how do we go ahead and have a comprehensive privacy legislative framework and an institutional mechanism to enforce that? It's also extremely important to understand the other context where India is the fastest growing global digital hub, where we are servicing corporations from across 80 to 90 countries, right? Who are all typically members of the industry body NASSCOM. And as in when we look at processing personal data of users of so many countries and citizens of so many countries, it's only fair that we offer that, reassure that framework that we take privacy seriously, and both at a government and an industry level, irrespective of which sector the industry is spanning, that we have the legislative framework to make sure that we can enforce this a comprehensive data protection privacy. This has been the context. This particular bill, what is approved by the cabinet, maybe Siddharth, coming from media, you have a view to it. I personally don't have it. So I'm commenting on the 2022 version, which was released by Ministry of Electronics and IT, right? Where they've now changed it to not the personal data protection bill, but a digital personal data protection bill. Very clearly, it is the jurisdiction is to be for digital data. And they've also mentioned digitized, that means in a computerized or a digital environment, if there is some paper-based information gathering and it is digitized, that would also come into the purview of this bill. And some of the features that are coming, there have been some challenges where many organizations have given that feedback.
Right.
I'm hoping a lot of that feedback has been factored to the version that has been taken to the cabinet.
Good points there, Rama and Kanish. Before I come to you, some of the salient details that are available as of now, viewers, and like Rama said, we don't have the new draft that the cabinet has cleared. There are brief snippets of information available, and I just want to highlight a couple of the big ticket headlines so far that we know. One is very significant penalties in the Indian context, and given penalties for other issues that are levied across different laws, 250 crore and that can go up to 500 crore. That's a very, very significant size of penalty. The second element would be exemptions for government entities. Now, this is obviously something that I'll get our experts to explain why and whether this is indeed necessary. Then element of voluntary disclosure. So far many times, viewers, you would have heard of those leaks that so and so's database has been leaked, 1,000,000, 100,000,000, 50,000,000, 200,000,000 phone numbers, card details, other information has been leaked, and you really don't know what has actually happened. So these are 2 or 3 of the headlines that we can share at this stage. Kanishk, I'm coming to you to sort of expand on that thought and tell us, what does this bill in the form that we know about really mean for the average Indian? Rama made that very important point that the change nomenclature actually is very, very significant, the addition of the word digital. Over to you, Kanishk.
Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you for having me. And some very important points raised by Rama. See, we have a lot of e-commerce companies today which collate user data, which includes personal identifiable information, which includes users' phone numbers, their banking details, their credit card details, right? Their sexual orientation. A lot of those data gets collated. Now, this data, if a company, a e-commerce company, or it could be a telecom service provider, lose that data, there have been little or no penalties enforced. In terms of how you safeguard personal identifiable information of users, would you take consent of these users when you are collecting that information? Are some of the key pillars on which this bill is built on. You may recall that one of our honorary members of parliament had gone to one of the popular stores, Decathlon, and she was asked for her phone number for providing the bill. Now, people can't just ask for your phone number and start sharing all of that. There has to be an element of consent, which is today lacking. A lot of companies today collate data of users, and then that data goes to third parties, and that same data is used for marketing purposes, used for analytics. Now, all of that will get regulated through this bill. With this penalty of up to 250 crores, which is coming in, these companies will have to build in processes in terms of how they safeguard user data, how they ensure that this data is not getting misused, how they will ensure that they are obtaining consent from users. There are also elements in terms of how do you collate data of children. The data of children which is getting collated today creates a lot of issues in terms of what children are getting watched, watching on television, who
Okay.
is supporting them. So the children part plays a very, very important role. The marketing of services plays a very, very important role. How is incorporated
Okay.
some of the big pillars. And there's also element if somebody's putting in negative information about you, misinformation about you, the right to be forgotten, right? If there is fake news of misinformation which has been put by somebody purposefully, and you want that information to be removed, those elements are there. The last part is that there are certain government organizations which collate data and which require this data for national safety and security, right? So those government entities will get exemption. And these entities' job is to safeguard not only national safety, but also larger safety of Indian citizens. So those are some of the broad pillars
Okay.
on which this personal data protection bill is built on.
Okay, glad that you added some of the other salient features. Rama, I want to pick this up regarding exemption for government entities. And to make it simple for our audience, recently there were reports, unverified, and the final word has not been said about that, in terms of a leak from a very large database, which is the vaccine database. Prior to that, we have heard about leaks from Aadhaar. So does this exemption clause mean that these entities are protected from suffering the consequences of any leak, or are they exempt from fulfilling some of the other conditions, including informed consent? What does this exemption really mean?
No, the current, the biggest challenge with this, Siddharth, I'm glad you brought out, was that pretty much sweeping exemptions to state agencies, where typically, there would be some emergency situations, which could be national, natural disasters, health emergency, national security emergencies, or a really law and order emergency. Some exemptions have to be called out. And there has to be a very clear oversight and accountability structure and a jurisdiction so that an exemption to a state agency. Otherwise, in normal course of business, any state agency or a public sector entity which is processing personal data should not be exempt from this bill. I think that has been a very strong feedback that has gone from multiple agencies. If state agencies, other than defined use cases, defined scenarios, with also some accountability and oversight structure, typically by a judiciary or some kind of a special tribunal which is going to grant this exemption. I think both private and private sector agencies and corporations or departments need to be complying with this privacy bill, and I do hope the version that is getting approved and tabled addresses that. Otherwise, I think the bill may not really serve the purpose of guaranteeing fundamental right. There should be exemptions for government and its agencies, but those emergency situations should be defined, limited. There should be a specific purpose called out, and there should be an oversight where this exemption is sought and granted based on the situation.
Kanishk, what is your understanding? Is it a blanket exemption across all manner of government data? And viewers, one of the points that we need to keep in mind is if you go back 25 years or thereabouts, most of the data that was collected outside of the banking system, and by the way, the banking system also significant chunk was in government hands, was government data. It was only once you had private telecom networks, followed by the advent of various digital platforms, the vaccination platform, and the Aadhaar platform, that very, very large, humongous amounts of data now exist in the government ecosystem. IRCTC, for example, also has very, very large amounts of data. Are all government databases being exempt from the consequences of a leak, or are there any caveats in this? Kanishk.
So I think it's not just that all government entities are being given a complete white signal, right? They will not be governed. The whole aspect is agencies whose job is to safeguard citizen and safeguard the nation. They would be getting exemption. Let's just take the example of National Disaster Management Authority, whose job is today to predict any kind of natural disaster which is occurring. Now, tomorrow, if there is a natural disaster which is occurring at one of the posts, they want to contact certain users who are staying near that post. They will require the information about those users. So those agencies, whose job is basically to safeguard users from any kind of harm, those agencies will be required to get those exemptions, and it is the necessary and need of the hour, because there will be certain set of emergency services which will require data to be analyzed and that data to be used for metadata location. So that's where the use of some of this data sets will come into the picture. Let's take the example of national intelligence agencies, whose job is today to track anti-national elements or terrorists or state actors.
Of
They
course.
would require that kind of exemption.
No, Kanish, that's a point completely well taken. Anything that comes even remotely under the ambit of national security, there can be no arguments, against that. But Rama, I want to come back to you. The amount of data that exists in the government system, if you leave that aside, the second thing is social media platforms. And most of these social media platforms are owned overseas. And there have been difficulties even with regard to their response under various frameworks of Indian law. That's a separate debate, I'm not going there. Does this digital data protection bill help me as a social media user in any way? Does it protect my data, or is it irrelevant move as far as that particular aspect is concerned?
No, Not really, because if you see this, the last version, very clearly there are rights for the data principal, including we can demand what data is being collected, for what purpose, and with whom it is being shared. So if there is a primary data fiduciary who's sharing data for processing or for analytics, or they will come and they will comply. Anybody who wants to do business in India, I have no doubt in my mind that they will scale up and start conforming to the law. The things about the question that you were asking about is how do we improve, the cooperation between countries or between national security organizations when a crime has to be investigated or a cyber crime. I think a lot needs to be done, which could probably be addressed in the Digital India Act or other intermediary liability things. But as far as rights of the data principal, very clearly, I think they're there, and I have no doubt in my mind that industry will scale up. Whereas the use cases like natural disasters and all that, which Kanishk articulated, they are justified, exemptions. The current version of the bill does not ring fence exemptions to state government. It's pretty much like not state governments. I'm talking about any government. Pretty much has a blanket exemption, and I do hope that is getting addressed.
And again, there have been several instances of government databases not even having a basic level of security. That was many years back. That has changed. But Rama, a quick follow up. You've just tweeted, and I'm reading this for the benefit of our viewers, that while you welcome the bill, you are recapping your dissent note in the Justice Sri Krishna Committee report of July 2018, where you say that you have advocated against data localization, financial data and passwords as sensitive personal data, and criminal offences. Quickly, take us through these 3 points, starting with data localization.
Yeah, the first thing is, I think the version I was referring to was the 2018 version. It talked about keeping a copy of the data in India, and also personal data, sensitive personal data, and potentially some categories of data getting declared down the line as critical data, where they were planning to enforce strong localization in the geography of India. That has been done away with the version that is there, which is facilitating cross-border data flows. Because unless cross-border data flows are enabled, I think India will be at a loss in terms of growing the digital economy, and also the way the technology industry, including startups, service so many countries. Any barriers of localization that we impose is probably in the long run or even in the short run going to hurt us. That has been addressed, whereas at that point of time there were provisions which were advocating for localization. So I have pushed back against in that dissent note. I don't have any worries on the 2022 version. It's silent on those versions. But unless they are harmonized with other sectoral, data regulations that have come up and which will come up in the future, I would still be worried whether there would be localization mandates coming from other sectoral regulators. But we will take that. The second one I talked about is criminal offenses. While you talked about very high penalties, I wouldn't say, everybody is going to be given a penalty of 250 crores, which is like a cap. I'm sure the Data Protection Authority, or the board as it's being called, is going to, when they levy that penalty, they're going to look at what harm, what kind of data has been breached or, unlawfully shared, what is the harm that has been caused, volume of the citizens, what type of data. It's not like everybody is going to be imposed 250 crores penalty. But at least it does not mention of data protection, any data breaches invoking a criminal offense, which I think is a very good step.
Kanishk, Rama has tweeted about this, but I want to put this question to you. Does this bill resolve the sort of difficult issue, if I may call it that, of cross-border transfer of data? Rama says that it is important for the digital economy. What's your own view on that?
So I think the new bill has somehow done away with data localization because they are looking at data being shared with certain countries where we are signing our partnerships, right? So India today is going and signing free trade agreements, the FTAs. So with whom we share data will primarily be driven those will be driven by those free trade agreements, and that free trade agreements are having data aspects also consideration into account, right? So if you look at India has signed a free trade agreement with Australia, India has signed a free trade agreement with UAE. We're also looking at a similar free trade agreement to be signed with UK. So today, government is looking at two aspects. One, deciding with whom they want to build up larger partnerships. And some of these companies today will be allowed to move and share this data outside India where they have data centers as well. But that will primarily be driven by the free FTAs which India is signing. So this is the new India where we have a multilateral road which India is taking forward to deciding where it wants this data to reside, and these companies will have to take those calls accordingly. That these are say 3 countries or 5 countries where the government is more comfortable that this data set will not be misused. I'll give you an example. Say today, Facebook decides that they are going to start a data center in Pakistan. And if that data center in Pakistan is storing and processing user data of India, the Indian government is going to be uncomfortable. And that is something that should not happen, right? Now, with this data protection bill, the government will have the authority to decide and tell a company like Facebook, okay, you cannot have our data residing in a data center in Pakistan or any other state where India does not have a great relationship. So that's something which will this, the new bill will ensure. And these companies will also have to tell to the government where this data is residing. They will have to obtain consent, and at the same time they will also have to share with the users that this is the information they are collecting. So tomorrow if you go and subscribe to any website, they have cookies through which they monitor your systems, your mobile phones, your desktops and laptops. Now what kind of data they are monitoring, what kind of tools they have put in, and why they need this information, that is something they will have to obtain consent from users and also inform them. That is what doesn't happen today. So these are going to be some of the key changes which we will see with this new personal data protection bill.
Rama, last word on the show to you. And the question is, if I provided consent and my data has been utilized, what happens if I change my mind at some point in my relationship with that data entity,
I
the
think,
entity?
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Withdrawal of consent to process data is definitely one of the fundamental principles of any data protection regime. And also, you can, when you withdraw the consent, there's a lot of other, data deletion rights or forget, all those rights will come in. We don't know what all will be factored into the bill because currently the version of the bill is very sparse with the details. So a lot will be left to the delegated rulemaking that will come up down the line once the bill has been enacted. So all of this will come in rules. These are withdrawal of consent and making sure that the data controller or fiduciary does not process my personal data once I've withdrawn the consent. But it cannot be that I withdraw the consent, but I want to avail a certain service which requires that the personal data needs to be processed. That is not a situation that would be allowed. But once you withdraw consent, no data fiduciary will be allowed to process. I think that will be a basic right of the data principle that will definitely be enforced by a bill like this.
Okay, very quickly, do you think we're going to see this law getting passed within the monsoon session, or are we looking at a much longer deliberation?
That's $1 million question. Not very sure whether it will get tabled and also put up for voting and getting passed, or it will again be referred to a JPC. It's very unlikely. My assessment, I could be completely wrong, because that's a prerogative of what the government and the parliament decides. It's unlikely to go to another because we have already spent 5 to 6 years on this. So it's very unlikely it will go. My guess is that once it is tabled in parliament, it's probably the effort from government would be to get it enacted. And then give a deadline for all the subsequent rulemaking, because the bill is very sparse on details, and you cannot have a legislative framework without the subsequent rulemaking to enforce privacy in India.
Kanishk, quick answer on that very question. What's your bet on the passage of the law?
So what I believe is that the government is very keen on getting this passed within this monsoon session, and they want to bring in the Digital India Act. The Digital India Act will not come into the picture unless this bill gets through. So the government's intention will be to get this passed within this monsoon session and follow up with the Digital India Act in the next session. So before the 2024 elections, government is keen on getting these two bills up and running within the country. And as part of our G20 leadership showcase to the world, that India is serious about looking at data protection and privacy more seriously.
Okay, that's a good positive note to end this discussion on. And all of us, every single Indian who is concerned with his data and its protection and privacy will stand to benefit from this law. As both of the experts have told us, it's taken some time, and hopefully it will happen very soon. Big thanks to Rama and Kanishk for their time, and you, the viewer, if you've been watching. We'll be back with more. Do stay tuned in. Until then, goodbye.